Yeah. You're listening to Autodesk's Digital Builder Podcast, a show that inspires construction professionals to innovate and use technology to improve how they build our world. I'm Eric Thomas, and I've been working in construction for nearly a decade. And now I have the privilege to sit down with industry trailblazers to hear how they're solving construction's biggest challenges and redefining the future of the built environment. Welcome back to Autodesk Digital Builder Podcast. I am your host, Eric Thomas. We are once again in San Francisco in the Autodesk headquarters, and I am joined by Cameron Page, the CEO and founder of Clearstory. And today we're going to be talking about change orders and a whole lot more. But what if change orders didn't have to feel so painful? So I think we're going to unpack a little bit of that and how we could manage that. But Cameron, I got to ask you, how are you feeling today? You feeling good?
I am feeling great. Thank you for having me. This is my first ever in-person podcast, so I'm excited to do that. Got to walk through San Francisco today. Beautiful day here. Nice to see the city making a big comeback. So yeah, thank you for having me. Looking forward to it.
It's a pleasure. And I'm always happy to come back to the city. I mean, I lived in the Bay Area for a really long time. Also, the last two times I've managed to bring good weather with me as well. It's lovely today. I'm hopeful it'll hold for tomorrow before I fly on back to Oregon. Thank you so much again for joining me. This is going to be a really cool one. But I'd like to hear a bit more about innovation before we dig directly into the joys that are change orders. And as CEO and founder, I think innovation is likely at the core of everything that you and your team does. Can you tell me a bit more from your perspective? How do you stay innovative? How do we keep this industry thinking in innovative ways, especially when just the process of delivering the work and doing everything that our teams have to do is oftentimes very challenging and they don't have a lot of extra time to think about innovation? Like, tell me a little bit about how you think about that.
Yeah, it's a great question. And it's a very broad question for construction. My background's, commercial construction. I was a GCPM for 9 years. And so for me, that's where the innovation came from, right? I worked on large scale construction projects all over the Bay Area. And, I think because of the challenges I felt, in my job, I was like, there's got to be a better way for change orders. And I think for our industry, I think a lot of innovation needs to come from people in the industry because they know the workflows, they know the challenges, intimately.
It's so complex in ways that a lot of other industries just simply are not.
Yeah. And that's also the challenge of innovation in our industry is there's so many problems to solve. You do any size commercial construction project or a heavy civil project, there's going to be a general contractor, an owner, but there might be 30 or 40 specialty contractors collaborating on that project. And that in and of itself creates complexity.
And it's so unique. What other industries can you think of that I have 40 other companies all in one spot at the same time trying to get work done?
Yeah. Now I'm building software products, which I thought would be very similar to building construction projects. And building software is challenging, of course, but it's nowhere near as complex as building a construction project with that many people to manage and get on the same page. What I love telling my story is hopefully it inspires other people from the industry to take the same leap that I took. Because I firmly believe that innovation in our industry needs to come from both outside the industry with fresh thinking, different skill sets. I don't think too many project managers are going to be able to build robotics fleets to go, automate physical construction. But people from the industry are going to know what those robots need to do and how to build within the given framework and regulations we have. And so I think there needs to be a balance of both. And I'm excited, especially with all the evolutions in AI, it's actually easier to go start technology companies and solve some of these problems. So I'm excited to see what the next 1 year, 5 years, 10 years is going to look like, because I do think a lot of people from our industry are going to help us solve challenges we have and drive us forward.
I'm inclined to agree. And I think the last 10 years have had an incredible curve upwards of tech adoption and tech development for AEC. But to your point, I don't think that curve is going to slow. I think it's going to get even steeper, which makes me curious. How did you decide to become a founder? I mean, that is quite a leap, as you mentioned, from going from construction project manager to, developer and CEO of a software company. So what did that journey look like? And, how did you end up in the seat you're in today?
It wasn't where I was expecting to end up, I will say, graduating college. But really, ultimately, I always wanted to build things. And I didn't even know that construction management was a major, but I knew that I wanted to be involved in the physical world some way. I thought that meant architecture at first when I was in high school. And when I found out there was a major where you could study building buildings, I was like, well, that seems exactly what I should go do. And so I had this insight as well, not knowing a ton about a construction management degree. but I read it for what it was. I'm going to manage construction. I was like, I probably should have worked in construction to really do that job well. And so while I was still in high school, I joined a wood framing commercial outfit in Sacramento where I grew up, worked as an apprentice carpenter for a couple of summers, and really got to learn the industry from the ground up, which I think is still valuable to me to this day, because now the software I'm building is for the same types of crews that I worked on.
Oh, yeah.
Which I think really gives unique perspective. But then I studied construction in college, and my dad had his own graphic design company, so I kind of saw what the entrepreneurial journey and starting your own company could look like. And it was always something I assumed I would do at some point. When I was in the industry as a PM, early on, I thought I would probably start like a construction company. That was kind of where I thought I was headed. But as I onboarded more and more software tools, PlanGrid, I was a very early adopter in PlanGrid. I know you spent a lot of time there, and Building Connected, a lot of the other tools that are now part of Autodesk. I definitely got inspired by those companies, but I also saw that like the problems I was having weren't all being solved. Like those were amazing tools to solve some of the problems that we had. But to your point earlier, it's complex.
Yeah.
There's a lot of problems to solve. As a project manager, my biggest challenge was cost uncertainty. I wanted to know my cost exposure at any moment in time. And for a general contractor, your cost is really through subcontractor change orders, because that's how your contracts change. We had financial software where we could track our budget and we could forecast changes to our budget. But what I didn't have was a way of just automatically seeing everything that was out there, regardless of whether or not I downloaded it from my inbox, or I'd emailed my sub and asked for a change order log. And, my superintendents would sign T&M tickets and I would maybe not know about it, or wait, 3 or 4 months for the actual price to come back. And just felt like there was this messy middle that was ready for some automation and get stakeholders aligned. And that's really been the vision of Clearstory since day one. And we wanted to build a product that didn't just add value to one stakeholder, added value to everyone. And so really what we wound up building was the industry's first collaborative change order log, where people could get on the same page in real time, regardless of what financial software you're using internally. That was, I guess, the long-winded journey of how I got to where I am today.
I appreciate that level set, though. And there's so much that goes into that, as far as deciding to jump in head first and make the change for change orders, unintentional pun there, as we kind of move this industry forward. But I love your point about applying to many different stakeholders as well, because I think if you narrow your niche too much, that's challenging for adoption in construction, because everybody kind of has to have a piece of the puzzle and be able to have access to the information that's available, and hopefully in a more equitable and timely fashion. And so I think we'll get into a little bit of that in a couple of minutes. But I'm also curious if you could go back and tell past self a little bit of advice as you started your journey to becoming founder and developing a company in the way you have. What kind of advice would you offer, especially for anybody who's a would-be founder out in the world listening right now?
So much. And what's super interesting too is, the time I started in 2018, and really I started ideating in 2017, but we didn't launch until mid 2018. And even then when we launched, it was a very early product, right? It was rough. But what's been amazing is just the tools that help people build software companies now have evolved so much. And even in the last 3 months, they've evolved dramatically with generative AI tools out there today. So I would probably tell myself to be very patient because help is coming. But I went to Cal Poly. That was the college I went to, construction management. And luckily, their motto is learn by doing. And so the big thing I told myself was just go, just try. And worst case scenario, you'll fail, but you'll have failed making the leap and trying to do something that you'll never regret. I think Jeff Bezos has this regrettability framework that he used to start Amazon. And he said to himself, when I'm 80 years old and he had a big job in banking and was very successful. When I'm 80 years old, if I take the leap and start Amazon and I fail, am I going to look back and be sad that I missed my bonus but I took the leap and started the company? Or will I be proud that I tried? And so for any would-be founder out there, like I would use that. I think you can Google it. It's called the regrettability framework. And again, you're going to learn so much trying to start a company and you're going to meet so many people, and it's going to be a roller coaster. It's going to be up and down. It's not easy. It's not for the faint of heart, but it's incredibly rewarding. Luckily we've been really successful, but that doesn't mean it's been easy. I think luckily the advice I gave myself of just go was kind of the right advice. And that's really what I would give another person who's maybe listening to this, debating is there's not a lot to lose, and that's different for everyone, but that's the way I looked at it.
I love your point too about just starting. And starting can feel so onerous, regardless of the scope and scale of the thing that you're trying to do. And I think just getting in the weeds and discovering what you didn't know, there's no way to figure out a lot of that stuff until you're in it in the moment and have enough perspective and context when you've gotten into it. I think you can apply that framework to most anything, whether it's starting a smaller project where you go, okay, I don't know what I'm going to get into, but you'll never know unless you give it a go. And so I think just prioritizing right and just having the guile to step back and go, okay, we're going to go do it now and then do it. I think that says a lot. I love that. That it makes sense that you're a founder if you've got that perspective.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I think you have to, and you just have to be prepared for challenges.
Yeah. So let's dig into the joys and roller coaster that is change orders. And so could you just start us off in a level set for everybody? How do we typically manage and respond to and document change orders in construction right now? In your experience, what's the source of a lot of that as well? Like, why does this keep happening?
I think the big thing for whether you're in the industry or outside is, there's a misconception around change orders that they're always a negative thing. And in reality, we plan for change in every single project because change is going to happen.
Yeah.
And a lot of times it's actually change we want. We want to bring in stakeholders early into the project and collaborate with them and make these changes with the best minds and thinking involved. And so as a general contractor, often what that looks like is bringing your trade partners in early. And of course, the challenge of bringing your trade partners in early is they're under contract.
Yep.
And so there's always this fine balance of when do we bring in the other parties into, the GMP process and actually cut them change orders. And so there's, pre-construction, where a lot of times you're collaborating with the architect, the owner, maybe a few select trades. Then there's a bidding process where you've agreed that this set of drawings is roughly the set of drawings that we're going to go to bid with. But there's always this balance of, let's take the millwork contractor, for example. All the architects I worked with were excited to get the millwork contractor under contract so they could figure out the best way to build millwork. Or maybe that millwork contractor had new products that they could offer and new details and new things like that. And so you want to bring those people in early, but as soon as you bring them in, every change is a change in cost. And once they're under contract, it's no longer a competitive bid process. And so the pressure that it puts on the actual change order and cost side is growing. And so I think at a really high level, people sort of have this misunderstanding of change, and change begins like at the beginning of the project. And a lot of times it's really positive because you can get to the best outcome, the best asset that you're building for your client by bringing in those stakeholders early. But it does mean, and amazing tools like you guys build at Autodesk allow us to collaborate really quickly and make design changes and fast decisions. But what a lot of people don't realize behind the scenes is that the general contractor is doing an incredible amount of paperwork to manage all that change. And so that's at the beginning of the project. But really what happens throughout the project is unforeseen conditions come up, permitting issues happen, weather delays happen. Maybe not all the details were fully fleshed out or something wasn't thought of, tariffs, all the different changes that can happen on a project happen. The way we think about it and kind of the way our software is built is to kind of address like three core workflows that the specialty contractor, the GC, and the owner kind of go through for every change order request. So the first one is there's a change we know about, whether it's a design change or maybe you need to direct your subcontractors to work overtime on Saturday because it rained on Tuesday and you couldn't work. That's what we call like a forward price change, where you need to tell them about it, get a cost back, review it, and then tell them to proceed.
Yep.
So we have a really powerful workflow to automate that. The other type of change is, a pipe breaks in the building, which happens. And maybe someone damages the paint after it's been, already painted. Obviously, that's not in the painting contractor's contract. With those types of changes, yes, you can ask for a quote, but if the pipe's leaking in the building, you're probably not going to wait for an estimate to go fix it. And so what happens in the industry is you track it on time and material. So you say, hey, go do the work, fix that pipe, write down the amount of labor, material, equipment you guys spent. We'll verify it. And then you take your approved rates and you price it into a change order request. Sounds really simple and easy, but almost the entire industry, we just ran a survey, and of the subcontractors we surveyed, 97% of them still track T&M on paper.
Yeah.
And so the process is just super manual. And as a GC, you're waiting to understand that cost. And then the third work stream is just there's a claim or there's a dispute, or you send a submittal response back to your subcontractor and they identified a cost. We call those unsolicited changes. So something you're not expecting. And the way Clearstory works is instead of the trade partners emailing those over or they submit them through Clearstory, we automatically log them so everyone has instant visibility. And then we integrate with a lot of different financial products, Autodesk being one of them.
It's such a complex process, and I appreciate you kind of spelling every kind of path that this can go down so thoughtfully. I think for the subs, especially if they're still tracking everything on paper or a spreadsheet or emailing or whatever, there's so many opportunities for gaps to come in too. And I'm sure it's hard sometimes to make sure that the subcontractors who are doing the work are made whole too. And there's a fairness aspect of this conversation to ensure people are getting paid for the work that they have done in a fair and equitable way. And I've heard this more than once, unfortunately, is there's also a lot of opportunity to kind of put your thumb on a specialty contractor who's gone through the process, like say the example of the pipe that was leaking. That wasn't expected. They went out and did the work before they got everything approved. The process of getting that made whole again sometimes might not be as straightforward as it should be. And I think tools like what you're talking about here give a lot more opportunity for that equitable process. And it also gives the people who are managing these changes a better way to make their case, to put their story forward and really help others understand this is how much this actually cost. And please make us whole again, or we're not going to work with you anymore.
Yeah. No, it's an interesting balance, between, again, the misconception around change orders that everyone makes more money on change orders. And that is certainly true. A trade partner can make more money on a change order. But, I was actually just with one of my friends this past weekend. He's a project executive at a big specialty contractor. And we were having this actual same conversation. And I asked him, I said, what would you rather have? Would you rather make extra money on a handful of change orders? Or would you rather just be paid faster on the change orders you have and make your markup? And he was like, make my markup all day long.
Yeah.
And when you think about the two different kind of types of change orders I described, T&M versus forward price, estimated changes. On the T&M side, specialty contractors hate it. General contractors hate it. Yet it actually is the most efficient way to track the true cost of a change, right? Because you're literally doing the work, someone's supervising it, the hours are the hours, the quantities are the quantities, and the sub is allowed to make their 15% markup on the extra work. But what winds up happening is the documentation is so bad, the delay in pricing it is so long that by the time it gets on the GC's desk to review and approve it, they've forgotten about it, or they can't read the documentation, or they sit on it, or they miss it in their inbox. Yep. And so everyone has this negative stigma around the T&M side of change order requests. And for subcontractors, when we talk to them, they mostly feel like it's a losing proposition because, if you have three $5,000 T&M change order requests and you lose one of them, forget the 15% markup you made, you just lost money.
Yeah.
And so that's one of the big challenges. And so for them, it's a cash flow issue, it's a revenue issue, and it's just a huge productivity suck. And then on the estimated side of change order requests, that's where subcontractors can make extra money because they're estimating the cost. They're taking a risk. They can also lose money, right? If they misestimate the change, they can proceed on the work and they can lose money. So obviously they're going to give themselves the best estimate they can.
All the contingency in the world.
Yeah. And that's really where the general contractor's job comes in to review and validate the change.
Yeah.
And that's where today it's a very human driven process to review and validate change order requests. And as a GC, that's really what your client's relying on you to do is make sure you're getting the most fair and valid cost. But even in that scenario, talking to my friend, he'd rather just get paid on the estimate rather than have to sit on it for 30, 60, 90, sometimes a year that they've already proceeded on the work and they're still waiting to get paid for it. And so I think what's powerful about Clearstory is not only do we automate, one of our big core values is trust and transparency, between stakeholders. What's cool is we give the subs the tools to price this stuff faster, make it more clear documentation so the GC has an easier time digesting and reviewing it. And in return, because the GC has easier tools to review it, they can get it to their owner faster. They can present a better product to package to their owner. And then ultimately they can get their trade partners faster so they can move forward. Projects can have faster closeouts, better outcomes. So what is exciting for me personally is just hearing from our customers on the positive impact we've had. It's really cool to see.
It makes sense. And having to foot the bill for such an extended period of time, that's tough for subcontractors too. I mean, they already hold the bag a lot of the time on all the materials pricing and all of these aspects that they're bringing into the general contractor. And the longer that those payments get delayed, the more at risk that company is too, because cash flow is such an important aspect of every nuance of construction. Be able to pay your people, to be able to pay your clients. And, if that starts going upside down, I think everybody has a problem, and it puts the project at risk, not just that one particular contractor. But I also appreciate your point too. Like, there is room in some of this for somebody to be a little bit dishonest in padding the bill as far as, okay, well, this cost 20 grand and it really cost him 8. And so you got to really give them some meaningful scrutiny here. And so I think all parties, there's a lot of honesty that has to come as far as just managing it, both in proposing the change order, but also managing and evaluating it and then ultimately paying out for it too. And it's a tough process. And especially when there are 100 or 200 or 1,000 or 5,000 change orders on a project, depending on the duration of time and the scope, I can see where things get lost and things get mixed up, or somebody gets frustrated, and people aren't necessarily acting in bad faith. But this is a hard process to manage. It's complex. And when we spoke the last time, when we initially met, you had mentioned that there's been an increase in the volume of change orders in the last 5 years, and I was hoping you could share your perspective on why that might be. Why are we having more than we had historically? Is that good? Is that bad? Like, what does that mean for construction?
Yeah. And it kind of goes back to what I was talking about earlier in terms of like product delivery has really changed. And this was my own lived experience, but we ran this big industry survey. One of the questions we asked was, do you feel like there's more change on projects than there were 5 years ago? And 86% of the respondents said yes. So why is that? Why do people have that gut feeling? And again, I feel like it's a just like construction, it's a complex, multifaceted answer. But I think one of the big things at its core is our ability to iterate on design changes and make these projects more fluid and more collaborative has just skyrocketed the last 20 years. Largely led by Rivet and the tools that Autodesk has, which I think are a net benefit to the industry by a pretty big order of magnitude. Like, the speed at which we can design is dramatically changed. What that means, though, is the amount of paperwork for a general contractor or specialty contractor to keep up with that change has increased with it. And we have not had the same innovation on the cost management side strictly in terms of change order collaboration and those workflows that we really focus on to really keep up with that change. And also, I think architects, their businesses have changed. Like, they have a building that used to take 10,000 billable hours to design now takes a couple hundred, or whatever that big change is. A lot of times they're even more involved in construction administration than they used to be. And so all of that changes is happening on the front end. And if you, at the beginning of the project, when you're still going through the 50% CD drawings and the 100% CD drawings, and if there's any latency in making those decisions on cost, it just has a continuous ripple effect across the rest of the project. And that's why at the end of projects, people are scrambling, you're working overtime, there's trade damage, people are working on top of each other, there's paint touch up. And so again, the better you can communicate and align and make decisions up front, even with a higher volume of change, the easier the tail end of the project is going to be in terms of financial closeout and not being stressed to the finish line, which we inevitably always are. And so for a number of those reasons, I think that's why the industry has that in their gut.
It makes sense. And on top of everything you've just shared, the expected schedule durations from the owner's perspective has continued to narrow and narrow and narrow. And everything now is like this massive accelerated schedule. And when you're trying to do so many things, it's no wonder that at the end, when you're trying to go through and finish your punch lists and go, okay, we need to turn this building over so we can go on to the next project that we've already bid out, won, and are supposed to be staffing up. Now you're costing either the GC or your other projects and everything else in between even more money, because now your staff is still here dealing with this project that should have been finished and gone, and your guys shouldn't be there anymore. And now everybody's still there. And so I understand why people get stressed and why people don't like the word change order when it comes in. But I think all the points you're making here, as far as just, sometimes a change order can be good. Maybe the owner decided they wanted additional scope and, bringing things into the table. And so the source of all of this can be varied. But I think we have the technology and the tools available now to start managing this in a more streamlined way and integrating with all the different aspects of folks' tech stack instead of just being siloed in your text messages and a poorly written note on a napkin.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's a big important part for general contractors too, is without cost confidence and clarity on what's out there, a lot of times you'll be very conservative in the allowances you're holding and the contingencies you're holding, and rightfully so. Like,
Oh, for sure.
you don't want to just give all that money away.
Yeah, you got to
back
protect yourself.
during the project. But at the same time, if you can be very confident in the speed that you're making decisions and where you're at in every single allowance, you can work with your client for them to maximize the value of the asset. We would always pride ourselves on being able to give back savings at the end of a project. But sometimes the client would actually be pissed off because they would have, upgraded the flooring had they known they had that extra money, because it's really hard to go back and make those changes later.
Yeah.
And so there is this even further enhanced benefit for a GC of providing, extra value to their client during the course of construction, on really where those allowances and contingencies are, so that you can help them maximize the value of their asset. So there's even like further benefits to really understanding your costs.
You mentioned earlier pre-construction, and I wanted to kind of come back to that. Can you share some thoughts on how intention and being very focused during the pre-construction phase hopefully could mitigate or reduce some of these change orders that are popping up? Like, how does that fit into the bigger narrative?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it should. And pre-construction, again, it goes back to complexity. There's so much to figure out in pre-con. And it's almost, I've been on projects where we've had over a year of pre-construction.
Yeah. And pre-con's gotten pretty cool in the last few years. I think previously it was just like everybody's an estimator, and there's a kind of a narrow focus for the folks doing that work. And today, like the pre-con role, pre-con executive, you could be pitching to customers. If you want to be just with the numbers, you can do that. Sorry to cut you off there, but like, I think it's a really neat career path in a way that it might not have felt, 5 or 10 or 15 years ago.
Yeah. And there's a lot of exciting platforms out there that are, innovating in that space. A lot of people from the industry who are trying to streamline it, because just like construction, it is complex.
Yeah.
One thing I've found with pre-con is oftentimes you determine the timeline of pre-con sort of arbitrarily, roughly based on the size of the project or the amount of dollars spent.
You have 6 months, go.
Exactly. But sometimes you almost give yourself too much time. And you're like, oh, we got a year of pre-con, we got 6 months of pre-con, we got all the time in the world to make decisions. And even then, you don't work at the pace you need, and you wind up rushing at the end of pre-con, just like you rush at the end of the project. No, but I do believe that good pre-con tools and good pre-con process can reduce the number of changes. But again, the best way to reduce the number of changes is get the trade partners in early, because ultimately without them in the room, you're making decisions on their behalf. And without them in the room, you're making the decisions, then you're going to get competitive bids, and then you want to bring them in to collaborate, and then you're back to like the change order process. So a lot of our customers actually bring us in pretty early on in the project, like as soon as they've awarded a contract, or sometimes even before. They're using us to align and decide on costs and use our review tools and things like that. We get asked all the time at events like, is AI and tools going to make change orders go away? And I don't think that's going to happen, because I don't think it's going to prevent weather and unforeseen conditions and owners changing their mind. I actually think it's going to be the opposite. I think we're going to be able to shrink pre-construction time down very narrowly, because we're going to be able to move so much faster. Yeah. And if we want to be able to move faster, we're going to need to be able to handle change better in terms of cost impacts. And so I think that's where we can play a really key role in the future of construction.
Yeah, I think one of the only certainties in construction is there is endless uncertainty. You can't predict the weather. You can't predict the owner's temperament, who's decided that they don't like that flooring and the fit out. And, God forbid, they're not using digital tools to begin with all the rework. And there's so much opportunity for change, whether it's unintentional and accidental or very deliberately by design, because they've saved money. So they decide to make a change because they have more to spend here, or whatever that might be. And so I agree. I don't think change orders should go away, but I think just that the efficiency and the streamlining is the big win in narrative that I think folks should be rallying around. I'd like to hear a little bit more about where Clearstory and other similar tools, where do you fit into the tech stack? Like how is the tool typically used by the customers that you've got?
Yeah, that's a great question. The way we think about it is what we are not a replacement for is your internal financial software. So like our firm belief is your financial software where you're managing your budget, your costs, that is private software where you have sensitive information, but you have to align on what's outstanding in terms of change with the companies you're working with. And that's where we focus. So for specialty contractors, we basically automate all the customer-facing workflows. Whatever financial software you're using internally, you would use us to create your T&M tickets. We automatically price the change order requests. But then what we create is a customer-facing, cloud-based, shareable change order log. So what happens as a specialty contractor is you're doing your best to email over change order requests. You're sending them a PDF of your change order log, once a month. But you have no idea if the GC's actually downloaded your change orders or has looked at them. And it's actually a risk for them. And so what's cool with our shareable change order log is you're ensuring your GC has all your stuff and there's no surprises.
Yeah.
And I think that's really one of the really powerful things about our tool. And then you can actually tie out, here's what I know my general contractor sees because he has this link to my live change order log. And I know that what I'm forecasting internally matches what he sees.
Yeah.
Because without our software, it's actually really hard to confirm the changes you're forecasting internally match what your GC sees. So that's, and we offer subcontractors a bunch of stuff beyond that. They can manage their change order rates and a bunch of other things. But that's at its core, like our value. And I think why, about 75% of our customers are subcontractors. So every trade vertical we have customers in, which actually that was one of the interesting things when I set out to build the company was that was the challenge. How do you build a network architected software company for every stakeholder?
Yeah.
It's really easy to build software just for GCs or just for electrical contractors, but we had the daunting task of building something that works for everyone. And what's cool today is, we have some of the largest elevator contractors as customers and structural steel and concrete, but then we have small like mom and pop painting and drywall companies, so really something that everyone can use. And then for general contractors, really at its core, the way our software works is we become your change order log with every subcontractor. So instead of them emailing you change order requests or responding to an RFQ and having kind of fragmented costs.
Yeah. The saddest spreadsheet ever basically is just piecemealed all together.
Yeah. Most GCs we talk to, I think in our survey, it was like 82% keep aside spreadsheet because what they're doing is they're logging everything they've received. And then they're asking their subs for an updated change order log to make sure they haven't missed anything.
Yep.
And we just automate that whole process. So what we do, like we have our integration with Autodesk. Like the way it works is you collect and receive everything in Clearstory. There's no data entry, just there automatically whenever your sub sends it to you. And then with a click of a button, you can push it to a PCO. So and then what you can do in Clearstory is you can filter for every change order request that doesn't have a PCO assigned to it. So when you go to your forecast, hey, show me all the risk that's not yet in this forecast. And you can finally answer that really basic but powerful question. And then on top of that, we have a bunch of other workflows for GCs like change order review. You can digitize all your T&M tickets. So if you're tired of receiving them on paper, you can have your subcontractors use our mobile app and a bunch of other things beyond that.
Okay. It makes sense. And leading into the fact that, 75% of your customers roughly are specialty contractors or subs, I want to talk about the relationship that they have between the GCs and some of the stuff we lightly touched on earlier. Can you just talk to me a bit more about how that contractual relationship between those two parties impacts the change order process? And I want to get into like just kind of some of the ways we can advocate for ourselves as specialty contractors and such, but let's start there.
That's something that I'm super proud of about the outcome we've been able to drive with the software is, some of the biggest disputes I got in my career were all around change orders or T&M tickets, which is one part of the change order process. We just did a QBR with Turner Construction, one of our largest customers, and we're meeting with, I think it's the project executive of the New York office, and we were talking about Clearstory, and she said, we don't have disputes anymore with our subcontractors. All that back and forth of closeout and finger pointing, we just don't have it anymore. And it was so cool to hear that from one of our marquee customers. And it's such a positive outcome to drive that manifests with like better trade partner relationships. They'll want to bid on your jobs more. They'll get paid faster. You can keep your client up to date faster. And one of the big things, you mentioned earlier is just closeout time. A lot of GCs, you're done with the project, great. You do the ribbon cutting ceremony, you open the building, but then you go back to the trailer and you're closing out change orders and finding T&M tickets in your superintendent's vest and all these other things. And that just adds overhead to your project beyond your, general conditions. And so there's just so many positive outcomes that can come with better trust and transparency around this process. And the same is true in reverse with our subcontractor customers. Like we hear from them all the time that they look more professional. They're able to de-risk their GC and keep them up to date. And in some of the negative scenarios, they've had better documentation to prove their point. Surprisingly, that just doesn't happen that much. Like we haven't heard about our backup documentation being used in litigation because I truly believe that we help them avoid that upfront. But there have been a few scenarios where they've had to go to our documentation, and luckily all the photos are time stamped. There's nothing that's handwritten. Everything was turned in on time. So really, if it ever does come to that, we help them be more equipped to handle those situations.
I love that outcome because everybody knows that construction can lean a little litigious at times, and it's unfortunate. And it's largely because of the way that our contracts are structured. The risk is pushed downhill essentially. And it's hard for a lot of contractors who don't have the documentation that you're talking about and the tech savviness at times to put together a package that successfully advocates for the work that they're doing. I just love hearing a path that can eliminate some of that and just let folks build those relationships, because construction is so relationship driven, and focus on getting the work done. And if we can do it in a way that's more equitable for every party across the entire org, it's almost like everybody's in a bit more of an IPD environment where they feel like there's more transparency and it gets the project built and done faster, and everybody can go on to the next one and continue building what they want to build, and the profit margins aren't so crunched. I think there's a lot of a win there.
Actually, the only thing I would add to that, we have a lot of people applying for customer success jobs, things like that at our company. And a lot of them we hire straight out of construction companies because they know our customers, they know the problems we solve. But to your point, like we see a lot of burnout. And when I first graduated construction management, and I was so excited to go build buildings, but then I sit in a trailer all day and I enter change orders into a spreadsheet. Like that's not what I was hoping to go do.
Unfortunately.
And so I think, what's exciting about not just our software, but a lot of the other tools and things that are coming out is we're taking a lot of the mundane and really painful tasks away so we can focus on the value-added tasks and actually enjoy the really cool part about being in construction, which is building buildings. Like the building we're building and someone built it. It's pretty epic looking around. Someone's probably really proud of this, but I'm guessing it was super painful to build this building. And I think, hopefully we're all driving towards people being happier and more excited to be in our industry.
I think that's critical for the growth and sustaining the industry as it stands too. I mean, I won't get into the labor shortage challenges because everybody's talking about it, but we have to be talking about it. And I think aspects of what you're talking about here are a great example. I've said this many times on Digital Builder. I don't work at a general contractor anymore for a very good reason. As a proposal manager and managing contract modifications, it never ended. And there were no tools built to manage construction RFPs in a way that made sense. And so it was so manual and so brutal. The timelines are rough. You get awarded, you jump into an interview, but you're still managing another deadline for a $200 million project. And it just got to a point where I was just like, I love this industry. I love the fact that the folks who I'm supporting are out building really cool stuff, but I'm dying inside. I'm so tired. And to me, like RFP is a swear word now, which is unfortunate because when I got the chance to go work on a site walk and go check out what we built in response to what I helped win, that was incredible.
Yeah.
But those moments ended up being fleeting because the grind just never stopped. And so I think that's one of the silver linings of this upward trajectory of technology in the construction industry right now, is it lets people step back and find the joy again. They get to go home at 5. They don't go home at 9. They get to focus on the tasks that are exciting instead of that mundane, repetitive data entry over and over and over again. You can tell I'm getting worked up right now because I'm passionate about this and I want to make it better. And we actually have to make it better for the sake of society because we don't have enough people to build the things that need to be built or to retrofit and renovate and continue maintaining the things that exist today. And if technology isn't applied in a thoughtful way, we're going to lag behind even more than we already are.
Absolutely. This may not feel like it manifests itself as big as it does, but if everyone in the industry is having pain doing their job to build a building, it kind of creates this just lag effect of everyone expecting construction to be hard and painful and ongoing. And that slows the velocity, to your point, of building new buildings, which we need more of. And so even these small incremental improvements have ripple effects across the industry. I think you'll be excited. Maybe you already know, but there are some pretty cool RFP automation tools that are coming out there.
I've started seeing it. And the early ones that were existing when I was still doing proposal management, they were all generally made for a very Q&A driven proposal where it was just, I've received a list of 70 questions and I have to answer all 70. And those were great. And we tried to use them for some of the construction proposals that I was working on. And they didn't fit into the way a construction proposal is built because it's so narrative driven where you're writing out the technical narrative and it's so project specific that I found, this is 7, 8, 9 years out of date now, but at that time, they didn't work because it was more work to try to shove them into the format that we needed. And I have to take another look at it because this is an area that, even though I'm grumpy about it, I'm still excited because I did it for so long. And if we can make that better, the bids are better, there's more certainty. The owners are having an easier time evaluating the proposals.
Yeah.
Like there's so much there. And so I think much like I think supply chain and material sourcing is kind of an untapped area for innovation right now because it's so challenging. I think the actual proposal process is ripe for disruption, as you would say here in the Bay Area.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
So what advice would you give to the contractors out there who are looking to make a change and start adopting technology, but feel a little bit overwhelmed at digitizing a process that they've managed on napkins and email and text messages historically? Like, where should folks think about when they're starting this journey?
What we see out there is a lot of hesitancy to using tools. And I think a lot of it's justified. There's been so many different products and so many different eras of software evolution in our industry that a lot of people have been left with like a bad taste in their mouth. I will say, I think some tools like PlanGrid and Building Connected and some of the other ones out there did a good job of like changing that narrative and kind of making people excited about using tools because they were really user-friendly, easy to adopt, not intimidating, and also focused. I actually do think having tools that are focused to a degree, as long as the problem they're solving is big enough, is actually really powerful because then, it's not a ton for the person to get trained on it and understand it and actually get value out of it. So what I would say too is for anyone out there who's thinking about their tech stack or just how to move forward or how to automate things, you cannot ignore the wave of AI that is coming. It is a very real thing. We're seeing dramatic efficiency improvements internally at our company. It's mind-boggling. But what I will say, I think the reason why we're getting a lot of those benefits is because we had a really good foundation in place. We had a lot of tools already there that had really good data integrity. We had a lot of knowledge information that we had documented meticulously over the years. And now we're leveraging all of that with these LLMs and AI tools, and it's truly unbelievable. But a lot of companies don't have that super solid foundation. And I don't think running to AI immediately is always like the right path. And so what I will say, what I'm excited about us, we have a lot of AI in our roadmap and things that we're working on, but we're like a really good foundational tool in terms of getting your documentation. There's a ton of data that we aggregate for our customers that they can leverage with AI. But if you're a specialty contractor and you're doing T&M tickets on paper and you're thinking about AI, I'd probably tell you to slow down and first digitize some of your basic processes because then you can actually leverage them and do a bunch of really cool stuff with it. And then the other thing too is I would look for software solutions that have even been proven out a long time over the industry or I'll talk about myself a little bit, come from people with conviction around the problem we're solving. I think the biggest thing that's resonated with our customers is that it's pretty obvious that we know this process and we've lived it and have really built a lot of best practices into our tool that we can now share and scale with everyone.
And it's so obvious to contractors when they're talking to somebody who doesn't understand the construction industry, or they have built a tool for construction that doesn't actually adhere to the way that building gets done. And I think tech adoption gives folks an opportunity to take a look at their processes and so, is there something that we could change for the better? But oftentimes there isn't. And if you've got a tool where you're trying to jam a square peg into a round hole, whoever your audience is within the AC industry is going to look at that and go, get out of here. And you don't get a chance to make a second opinion. You make that first opinion and they're gone because they don't have time, and they have so much room to smell the BS. They go, no, we're out. And so I think having folks like yourself with founders who do have the conviction, but also the background and experience in construction to truly understand these problems, or at least the core of the problem, even if it's unique for a particular organization with the way that they're getting work done. That understanding, I think, is a requirement for folks to be building. And you bring in the people who have the innovation experience and come from other industries and understand technology in a way that's not being applied within the AC industry. But if you don't mesh those two together, you're going to fall flat on your face.
Yeah, absolutely. No, I think that's spot on. And for me early on, I went through so many different software developers and people like trying to find the right person. And to your point, it wasn't until I really matched up my experience with the software skill set that I think we really took off. And so I think there's always like a blend of putting those puzzle pieces together to really accelerate. But yeah, that's how I would think about it.
So I'm curious, What other tools or technologies right now within the AECO ecosystem are you really excited about? I can't help but nerd out a little bit. So outside of the realm of change orders, like what are you fired up about? What do you think is really neat right now? Either something available now or if there's something coming in the future, I'd love to hear about that too.
It's cool being in the industry. You have a lot of friends that you wind up meeting because you're fellow founders and you're in the same grind together. And so there's tons of cool pre-construction tools out there. Concentric, I think, is building something really compelling, but there's also Join and Edify, and like there's tons of cool innovation and competition happening in that space. Joist AI is the RFP tool I was mentioning that I've heard really good feedback from a lot of people on.
Is that specific to AEC?
Yeah.
I'm going to have to check that out just because I'm curious, because I'm like, all right, did you guys figure it out? Because every time I looked at a tool in that realm, I was like, God, get out of here. Like this will not work for what I'm trying to do. It hurt. It sucked.
Well, you think about it, it's a really good use case for AI, right? Because to your point about like the Q&A style of response and it being too rigid, right? Because every RFP is different.
Yep.
I think it's just a kind of an obvious use case for an LLM to digest that, pull from your data set, respond to it appropriately. And the founders from the industry as well. And so I have not used it. I have no idea if it's a great tool or not, but I've heard good things. But it just excites me too, because that's what I would geek out on when I was in construction. I was always grabbed to the latest tools. And there's a bunch more. So I apologize to all my friends out there. Project Mark, our industry doesn't really know what a CRM is, and they're building out a construction-specific CRM, customer relationship management software.
Makes sense. When I was using them previously to try pull up project information or whatever, it was like pulling teeth every single time because it just didn't fit the fields in the way that we were trying to categorize and manage data. It just didn't. So that's cool that they're doing focus for it.
Yeah. So those are just a handful. There's a bunch out there that's really exciting.
Yeah. That's a testament to the level of innovation that's happening in this industry right now, which admittedly also is very overwhelming sometimes for folks who are trying to decide and choose and select which tools that make sense for them to bring into their tech stack. And the way I always advise folks, narrow your focus, pick a problem, make sure you're problem driven and not tech driven as far as making your choices in the technology you're going to adopt and choose, and then iterate from there. If you get caught into shiny new toy syndrome and you're just chasing all the cool stuff because it sounds interesting, like that's great to a degree, but it also brings, I think, a lot of risks, and also a lot of risks of a lack of adoption because folks don't know where to start because you've given them so much without enough guidance on how to actually leverage it in their day-to-day work.
What's cool too, being out here in the industry now for 7 years and seeing so many different companies, tech evaluation process or lack thereof. And I will say a lot of it's pretty impressive the way companies, evaluate and deploy software. But what is interesting is a handful of our biggest customers actually will run internal surveys once a year of like, hey, what are your biggest pain points? And 3 very large customers of ours, T&M tickets were the biggest pain point that their employees identified and something they wanted to solve. And it's just one of those things where it's like, for us to have built a T&M only software, I don't think it would have been a big enough problem to solve in like a single point solution. So that's why, we really built a complete problem solving of the change order gap, the gap between companies. But T&M is such a big enough problem that it votes up on those employee pain point surveys. And so a couple of times now we've gotten pulled in because that it becomes an initiative to go solve. And then usually that's like our wedge point in of like, hey, by the way, we could solve a bunch of these other related workflows in one spot. So yeah, we've seen some cool ways that people, really leverage their teams to understand the problems they have. And to your point, you don't want a hammer looking for a nail. You want to like find the problem and then go find the right tool to fix it.
Yep. So I got one more question for you today, and it's one of my favorite parts of every episode. What is one tool that you use on every project you work on, regardless of what project it is?
Back when I was in construction?
It can be anything. If it's construction related, cool. If it's just something you find yourself using every time, I'm interested in hearing about it too. It's up to you.
It's going to sound lame, to be honest, but it's ChatGPT. It's such an incredible tool. Every month it seems to get better and better, and the way that we're using it is pretty incredible. We're probably late to the party, but like a few months ago, we discovered the custom GPTs, and we fed it all of our information and data, and now it thinks and speaks like us.
Yep.
And it's just unbelievable what we can get out of it. And I do think it can be a really powerful tool for, like we were talking about earlier, the labor shortage, right? And a lot of the challenge with labor shortage is information sharing. And if you take the time, and ChatGPT is like $30 a month, if you take the time and document some of that stuff, you can house it in there. And then now you have a journeyman carpenter who can answer any question for an apprentice, or that's just one of many examples, or an estimator who knows everything about estimating.
Yep.
And there's other, probably more purpose-built tools to do it, but it works. And I wish I had a better, more innovative thing, because everyone obviously knows about that. But for me, just the power of it has been pretty incredible.
But I don't think everybody knows about the nuance where you can customize these tools as well. And so, like, obviously just the generic chat GPT is out there and you can plug whatever you want into it and it'll give information back. There's risk in that. And if you're using the public facing one, because again, everything you put into there could be discoverable by somebody else, because it is learning everything you're sharing with it. At Autodesk, we use a version of ChatGPT that's walled off. It's just for us. So our information isn't going out into the ether. And I think that's what I advise folks to use if they're not using one of the tools that's coming out in this realm that's specific to construction, is like wall that off.
Absolutely.
But then you get to train it on all that information that you just pointed out that is your own proprietary data. And now you've got an agent that is a lot smarter in the use case that you're specifically aiming for. And so I love that answer. And I think it's just really a statement of the times right now where AI keeps coming up. But your example here, I think, really sits in the realm of real AI versus hype AI, where there's a lot of people just going with AI. And at some point you're just like, please stop, because it's hype in a way that doesn't add value. And so I think just be really strategic when you're considering AI tools, and when you deploy them, I think there is a benefit, but also just remember too, it does hallucinate sometimes. So you got to validate some of the things that come out of there.
Yeah, it's interesting. We, to your point, yes, you have to be very methodical about how you set it up and wall it off. But once you get it set up right, it was interesting. I've just always been a stickler, and I'm sure it's super annoying to my team, but I'm all about documentation. And probably it's from like my construction days of like, I wanted to create clear SOPs for my team, clear ways for them to follow. But because we did that so much over the last few years, like we have a sales playbook that I detailed out on like how to sell Clearstory, how to talk about it, how to position it, how to educate people on this new thing. And now, a new sales rep can just ask a question to our custom GPT and understand how to like sell our software or handle an objection. It's unbelievable, but you have to put in the work. It's not just going to like learn all that stuff on its own. And out of the box, it's not going to know anything about your company.
Yeah.
So
prompt engineering is a skill set in its own merit.
For sure. Yeah.
Well, I love that answer, Cameron. And again, just thank you so much for joining me on this episode of Digital Builder. If you're out there listening, you've probably figured out that I am your host, Eric Thomas. If you have any questions for me, go find me on LinkedIn. But before I let you go today, I'm going to beg, please share this episode if you enjoyed it with your friends. If you just like Digital Builder, tell somebody. You can leave all the reviews in the world, which do help. Please go do that as well. But if you can tell your friends, we're always very grateful. That does help the show grow and gets the word out. So I appreciate that. Of course, if you are an audio listener, you can always head over to YouTube. We are in a very beautiful location in San Francisco. So make sure you check us out on the Autodesk Construction Cloud YouTube channel. And we are on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and any other major podcast player that you can find. So until the next time, goodbye.